Deeply religious people often describe the Day of Judgment as the moment when the trumpets of Jericho will blast through the skies, and both the living and dead will stand before God to face divine judgment. But maybe a more realistic version of that day is the terrifying image of our planet being completely consumed by the raging flames of a full-blown nuclear war. Of course, no one truly knows if something like that will ever happen, or exactly how it might unfold, or what it would look like. Still, scientists have long warned us that we could face something just as terrifying, not through war, but through a massive natural disaster that we failed to stop in time. Right now, in our own lifetime, we're watching the climate shift drastically before our eyes, and it could bring about the end of the world much sooner than anyone ever imagined. Hey there, everyone! One of the most alarming warning signs of what's to come is the behavior of the now famous Thwaites Glacier. It's no exaggeration that this icy giant has earned the ominous nickname, the Doomsday Glacier. Welcome back, everyone, and thanks for joining us here on our channel. Let's get into it. Assessing the situation. Right now, the Thwaites Glacier stands as one of the largest ice masses within the entire Antarctic ice sheet, and it's gained notoriety for the incredible speed at which it's moving and melting. This massive ice shelf stretches roughly 75 miles along the coast of West Antarctica, and its thickness ranges from about 2,600 feet all the way up to over 6,500 feet. The glacier's massive ice tongue flows directly into Pine Island Bay, part of the Amundsen Sea, just to the east of a dormant volcano known as Mount Murphy. As of 2021, the surface layer of the glacier was moving at a rate of about 2,000 feet every single year. Glaciologists now predict that within the next 5 years, that movement could ramp up to nearly 1.25 miles annually. The melting of this glacier actually began around 11,600 years ago, right after the end of the last ice age. But if you think ice always melts slowly, little by little over centuries, you're in for a surprise. That would only be true if the Earth's cycle of ice ages and warm periods were driven solely by its elliptical orbit around the Sun. But that idea has been left behind. It's outdated. According to the latest research, a crucial factor in triggering ice ages is something called axial precession, a slow, wobbling shift in the tilt of Earth's rotational axis. In fact, modern climate science suggests that melting events in the northern and southern hemispheres are far more closely linked than we used to believe. One key theory is that changes in the Earth's axial tilt caused glaciers in the northern hemisphere to melt, flooding the North Atlantic with massive volumes of fresh water. That sudden influx disrupted ocean currents, which in turn triggered a rise in water temperatures across the South Atlantic and eventually throughout the entire global ocean system. A research team led by Richard Alley at Pennsylvania State University studied core samples from the Antarctic ice sheet and found evidence that this kind of warming happened extremely abruptly. In their view, the intense warming event that caused sea levels to surge lasted no more than 3 short years. At the time of that disaster, Homo sapiens had already spread across large parts of the world, and many believed that ancient cultures remembered the event in the form of great flood myths and legends passed down through generations. And now, roughly 10,000 years later, we may be facing a terrifying repeat of that event, only on an even larger and more dangerous scale. Since the 1980s, the Thwaites Glacier has been melting at a much faster pace than ever before. This alarming trend was confirmed by a global team of climate scientists from countries like the United States and the United Kingdom. According to a study published in the scientific journal PNAS, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, this rapid melting has already caused global sea levels to rise by 4%. Scientists believe the tipping point that kicked off this acceleration may have been an unusually intense El Niño event that struck back in the 1940s. As you may know, El Niño is a recurring global climate phenomenon that raises sea surface temperatures across the tropical Pacific Ocean every few years. Typically, an El Niño episode lasts somewhere between 9 and 18 months, and it's often followed by its cooler counterpart known as La Niña. But the El Niño of that era was exceptionally powerful. It began in 1939 and didn't let up until 1942. And so the melting of the Thwaites Glacier, which began accelerating in 1939, has continued relentlessly ever since. What started as a brief burst of warming appears to have triggered a much more powerful and long-lasting chain reaction. What the melting of the Thwaites Glacier could unleash. Professor Julia Wellner, a geologist at the University of Houston, believes that the thermal impact of El Niño is what threw the entire Antarctic glacier system out of balance. She compares the Thwaites Glacier to a bottle stopper. Right now, it's holding back the widespread collapse of glaciers across West Antarctica. But if this stopper pops out, all of those glaciers could start sliding into the warmer waters of the Pacific Ocean. And as if that wasn't terrifying enough, scientists are now saying that the melting of the so-called Doomsday Glacier could actually trigger the rapid collapse of glaciers not just in Antarctica, but all around the world. Even if we only focus on Thwaites itself, there's more than enough reason to justify its apocalyptic nickname. In fact, if this one glacier were to melt entirely into the Southern Ocean, it could raise global sea levels by a staggering 26 inches. The first thing we need to face is this: sea level rise is no longer something we can avoid, it's already underway. The only real question left is how fast it's going to happen. Over the last few decades, scientific opinion about the Thwaites Glacier has shifted from alarmist views like it's about to collapse any moment to more moderate theories suggesting it could take 100 to 150 years to fully break apart and melt. But what still worries observers is the shape of the bedrock beneath the glacier. It tilts toward the ice shelf, which naturally helps the ice flow faster and melt more quickly. Scientists fear that if the ice shelf currently supporting most of the Doomsday Glacier were to collapse, it would expose a massive wall of ice stretching more than 60 miles along the coast. And that could lead to enormous chunks of ice breaking off one after another and crashing into the sea. In recent years, though, a more reassuring theory began to gain traction, one suggesting that even if the ice shelf breaks apart, the new cliff of ice left behind would be lower and more stable. According to this idea, even in the worst-case scenarios, the Thwaites Glacier would probably hold on for another 50 years. But a wave of research has shaken that optimism and left scientists much more concerned once again. On March 13, 2025, the International Climate Consortium released a report on the current state of the Thwaites Glacier, and for anyone who had been hoping for good news, the findings were like a bucket of ice-cold water. The report revealed that several massive diagonal cracks have formed on the eastern side of the glacier, and they're expanding at a rate of more than 1.2 miles per year. If this trend continues, what was once thought to be a collapse 50 to 150 years away could instead happen completely within just the next 5 years. Just to put things in perspective, this glacier is so enormous that the entire landmass of the United Kingdom could fit inside it. But the past decade has been especially brutal. During this relatively short period, the glacier has lost over 144 cubic miles of ice. And because Thwaites acts like a giant dam that holds back warm seawater from pushing deeper into the West Antarctic ice sheet, this rapid loss should be seen as a dire warning for all of humanity. If the glacier disappears, there will be nothing left to stop that warm ocean water from seeping into the gap between the surface of Antarctica and the base of its ice, which can be over 1.8 miles thick. Just so you know, the average thickness of Antarctic ice is about 6,700 feet, and in some places it reaches more than 14,700 feet. But the reason Thwaites is called the Doomsday Glacier isn't just because of how massive it is. Yes, it's true that if it melts, sea levels would rise by about 26 inches. And that alone would be catastrophic enough to submerge countless cities, nations, and islands across the globe. Places like the stunning Maldives and low-lying regions of countries like the Netherlands, Venice, and Bangladesh would suffer devastating flooding. But the real nightmare is what comes next, because all of that is just the beginning. If the Doomsday Glacier collapses, it could serve as the very trigger that causes the entire Antarctic ice sheet to begin breaking apart. If that happens, global sea levels could surge by a staggering 10 feet. And from there, Like a chain of dominoes falling one after another, the ice in Greenland and the Arctic would also start melting at an unstoppable pace. If that process continues, we could be facing a total sea level rise of nearly 23 feet. That would be nothing short of the end of the world as we know it. Cities like London and Cambridge in the UK, St. Petersburg in Russia, and coastal capitals along the Baltic Sea like Tallinn, Helsinki would all end up underwater. And what would happen to the Netherlands, a country that already lies mostly below sea level and is protected by nothing more than modest-sized levees? It would vanish beneath the waves of the North Sea, completely wiped off the map. In China, major cities with populations in the millions, Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, would be swallowed by the relentless advance of the sea. Huge swaths of Japan and the United States, where hundreds of millions of people live today, would also be submerged and lost. This isn't some distant nightmare. It's a future we can no longer avoid. That's why, now more than ever, humanity must prepare to survive in a radically changed world. Because if this great flooding begins within the next 5 years, it will be too late to prepare, and we'll be staring down one of the most devastating catastrophes in human history. Thankfully, scientists still consider that outcome to be among the worst-case scenarios, not the most likely one. Still, even the more moderate projections are nothing to feel safe about. Under this middle ground scenario, sea levels would rise by up to 3 feet by the middle of this century. But what will actually happen remains hidden, as if behind 7 mysterious veils. And to make matters worse, the acceleration of Antarctic melting is being fueled by the steady march of global warming. On the opposite side of the planet, the Arctic is also seeing an alarming increase in melting rates. According to estimates by the Danish Meteorological Institute, since 2021, summertime ice loss in the Arctic has reached around 8 billion tons per day, nearly double the average from previous years. That same institute also reported that in the summer of 2021, temperatures in northern Greenland reached around 68 degrees Fahrenheit, which is roughly twice the normal summer average for that region. But developed countries are not just sitting back and waiting for disaster to strike. In 2018, as part of an international program focused on studying the Thwaites Glacier, a dedicated monitoring team was established to keep a constant watch on its condition. Possible solutions. The situation has grown so serious that no matter how bold or outlandish a proposed solution may be, hardly anyone is shocked anymore. For example, Professor Douglas McHale from the University of Chicago has suggested a radical idea, installing a network of air-permeable pipes beneath the glacier that would release bubbles to form a barrier, blocking warm seawater from seeping underneath the ice. An even wilder concept involves covering the glacier's surface with a special reflective sheet designed to bounce sunlight away and slow the melting process. Believe it or not, this method has actually been used in parts of the Alps to help preserve small glaciers. Still, these glacier-saving projects mostly remain theoretical, more like ideas on paper than real-world solutions. Either the technology isn't feasible yet, or there's pushback from environmental advocates concerned about unintended consequences. What's more realistic, at least for now, are national projects aiming at coping with the effects of rising seas rather than stopping them outright. In the Netherlands, for instance, engineers are already designing entire floating cities, while Singapore has begun physically raising the elevation of its coastal zones. Venice, too, has launched major efforts to protect its historic city from the rising tide. They've started constructing mobile flood barriers that can be raised to shield the city from storm surges and high water levels. In Japan, they're going even further. Some regions have begun relocating entire infrastructure systems inland, building them on higher ground to stay safe from future flooding. When you look at all these efforts, it's clear that even in the face of the catastrophic changes the Doomsday Glacier could unleash, humanity may still have the strength to adapt and survive. In the end, it all comes down to how clearly we can understand the scale of this threat and how realistically we evaluate the time we have left to prepare. If you enjoyed today's video, please give it a thumbs up and share it on social media to help spread the word. Until next time, take care and goodbye.